Kamala Harris will be accepting her party's formal nomination for president tonight. She's the first Black South Asian woman in this role. While many are excited that they can see themselves in Harris, these very identities are also being scrutinized by her opponents.
100%. She was a DEI hire.
I don't know. Is she Indian or is she Black?
She pretends to be one thing in front of one audience. She pretends to be something different in front of another audience.
Tonight, Harris will present her vision for moving the country forward, but she'll also have to make the case for her qualifications. How much of that is normal for candidates, and how much is her having to respond to racism and sexism? To dive into these thoughts and more, we're joined by Moya Bailey, who's associate professor in the Department of Communication Studies at Northwestern University. Hey, Moya.
Hello.
Natalie Hopkinson is here. She's associate professor of media, democracy, and society at American University in D.C. Hey, Natalie.
Hey.
Good to see you. And Nitasha Sharma is professor of Asian American Studies and Black Studies at Northwestern as well. Welcome to Reset.
Excited to be here.
Natalie, you are fired up this election season, I hear, but it's not how you felt during the 2020 election when Kamala Harris was running then for president. So what's changed for you?
Well, 2020 was such a traumatic year. I mean, we're still unpacking between COVID and the George Floyd protests. So we weren't really feeling a prosecutor as a candidate as much as we are now. So 4 years later, the whole thing has changed. And I just feel like after going into hibernation and kind of trying to hide away from politics, I have reemerged. When Joe Biden dropped out, I dropped in, and I'm locked in.
I think a lot of people across the country have been saying that. But Moya, you've got critiques on Kamala Harris's policy, right? How are you feeling now about this wave of excitement that seems to be packing arena after arena on this Harris Walls campaign trail?
You know, it's interesting. I've been thinking a lot about this in terms of fandom and how people really love a celebrity. And the energy that she's able to command is something that people find very compelling. But I do think that it is keeping us and keeping our attention away from some of the real policy concerns that we have. Something we saw last night was that the uncommitted delegates couldn't get any Palestinians on the docket to speak. So I'm really still concerned about this question of, you know, can we have the people that are most marginalized in the conversation?
And I'm glad you brought that up. We will actually dig deeper into it later in the conversation, Moya. Nitasha, does this feel like a breaking the glass ceiling moment to you?
I definitely have heard folks talking about this as being a breaking the glass ceiling, breaking the bamboo ceiling that kind of refers to Asian Americans. Mm-hmm. But I agree that we really need to kind of disarticulate and pull apart the identity and her story and her background from her policies and really interrogate both. They're not necessarily intertwined. What I do think is going to happen is that because she's a first in so many ways that you mentioned, that the United States is going to get a lesson on, you know, our understanding of race and multiraciality and, you know, how one can be both and not either or.
Yes.
So I'm excited about moving forward our conversations on race in the United States.
So on the note of the excitement here, let's talk about the organizing that got us here, Natalie. Biden announced he was stepping out of the race and endorsing Harris. This was on Sunday, July 21st. That's when you said you dropped in, right?
Yes.
The same evening, some 90,000 Black women and allies, they logged on to a Zoom meeting that was organized by #WinWithBlackWomen. They were supporting Harris's new campaign. A huge, huge feat. So you have seen the group evolve, Natalie, over the years. I'm curious what sticks out to you, especially after that moment.
Yeah, so the win for Black women, it's many cases, it looks like something happened overnight. It's actually been decades in the making. A lot of the organizers with Win for Black Women, these are veteran Black women who are key. They've been key to every Democratic movement over the past several decades. They started organizing in 2020 over ensuring that Joe Biden chose a Black woman. So they were very instrumental in making sure that Kamala was selected as the VP. Not necessarily specifically her, but making sure that Black women finally got a seat at the main, being that stalwarts of the Democratic Party. We've been carrying the party on our backs for a very long time. We should have an opportunity to be on the front. Mm-hmm. So they advocated for that in 2020 successfully, and they never stopped advocating. Those Zooms have been going on for years. And so it just looked amazing because they came right out the gate. They broke Zoom.
Raised a lot of money.
They had to tell Zoom to actually expand their capacity because that's how many people came on.
Right.
And they sort of kicked forward this, sort of domino of affinity groups that followed. White men for Kamala, South Asian women for Kamala,
White dudes for Kamala.
White dudes for Kamala, So it's been a beautiful thing. But again, looks like it was overnight, but this is like decades of hard work and advocacy.
It's no surprise Harris is getting critiqued from all over the political spectrum. I want to start with the attacks from politicians on the right. Many have been intentionally mispronouncing her name. I'll start there, right? Saying Kamala. We've heard that a lot. Or Kamabla. As someone who is a stickler for getting names right on a daily basis, I mean, I went over the pronunciation of your names several times before you walked into the studio. I find that very disrespectful because it feels like they're doing it on purpose. And you see Trump at the top of the ticket doing the same. What are your thoughts, though? I'll go around. Nitasha, you first.
Yeah, I remember there was a video on how to pronounce her name back in when she was running in 2020. And I would say even among Indian Americans, many of us have said, oh, Kamala is very common. Like it's very, it resonates with us. My auntie in India is named Kamala.
Yeah.
And we pronounce it differently from North India versus South India. So I do know that, there is a way in which I think the mispronunciation is a way to make her seem foreign. And a lot of folks who are immigrants or the children of immigrants, particularly Asian Americans, people from Latin America, Caribbean, the way to make someone feel like they are not American is by mispronouncing their name and making them seem forever foreigner and not American. And so I think part of the mispronunciation is that. And another part is sort of sexism, is the mispronunciation and a way to speak about her in her first name, which sometimes she uses. But we also saw a similar sort of, response to Barack Obama as well.
Yeah.
So there's a few things going on here racially with regard to the child of immigrants and her gender.
Good points. Moya?
Yeah, I just want to second those comments to also add that we also see this with Black names. So,
yes.
Yeah, so part of this, and I think even the Kamabla is some little tease or attempt to kind of bring her Blackness into the conversation as well. There's so many opportunities to actually have a substantive conversation about what she stands for, but instead we're spending time paying attention to her name as opposed to what she's actually doing. And so again, all of these ways that we don't pay attention to the substance.
Distractions. That's the word. Natalie?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, just to show how much, people learned how to pronounce Putin. And somehow, people learned how to pronounce the Ukrainian president, which I'm not going to try to do right now. But people have done it successfully. And certainly, like Trump and all these other people have been able to do it. So it's very intentional slap in the face. But just sort of picking up on the point you brought up earlier about sort of the multiple identities. I mean, Kamala is it's a wonderful opportunity because most Black people have multiple identities. Like an overwhelming majority of Black people are of mixed race descent. We are in a country that is by definition hybrid and mixed. And so it's a good opportunity to sort of dispel these myths around purity and race. And these are, they actually don't exist. They're not really real. But it's opportunities for us to have conversations about that.
Yeah, it's clear that people in this country across party lines, they don't really know how to talk about race, especially in public. Of course, that also includes liberals. I want to play a moment here. Folks might be familiar with it. This is on the Drew Barrymore show back in May. It made people uncomfortable, to say the least. Let's listen.
We all need a mom. I've been thinking that we really all need a tremendous hug in the world right now. Yeah. But in our country, we need you to be Mamala of the country.
I can just see the three of you cringing at the table. I'm sure it was well-intentioned. Drew Barrymore is holding Kamala Harris's hands, both her hands, looking deep into her eyes, trying to make that connection. But some people did say the comment was deeply patronizing. How did it strike you, Natalie?
Totally, the mammy tropes, this idea. They literally in Congress, they tried to erect a monument to mammies on the mall. That's how strong this romanticism around this Black mother who's simply the sacrificial person who doesn't have an identity or ideas of her own, but is just there to sort of take care of other people and serve other people, it's deeply troubling. That is not how you treat the leader of the free world. Like, she is a leader. She's a military leader. She's every type of other leader other than, everybody's mother.
Yeah.
Deeply offensive.
Deeply offensive. You coined the term misogynoir, Moya. Fill us in on what it means, in case folks aren't familiar, and how it's at play in some of these comments being made towards Harris.
Absolutely. So I define misogynoir as the anti-Black racist misogyny that Black women and people read as Black women experience. So it's all of the ways that people have certain representations, ideas about who Black women are that aren't actually based in fact, and then have material consequences on their lives. So in this case, we just, as you were saying, we have a Black woman who is actually doing the work of being vice president and then reduced to a representation around her that is invoking ideas of the mammy figure and not really paying attention to her actual work and competence as a leader. Mm-hmm. So again, misogynoir is a distraction that keeps us from focusing on the real material that we should be paying attention to.
Oh, I've just been seeing so much online. It's been interesting to see how a month ago, I remember some Black people, Black men especially, were trending online because they were making these outlandish comments about Harris and saying, and this is why I will not vote for her. The reasons ran the gamut, but I want to play a bit of what YouTuber Charleston White had to say in a social media post in July, and this is all I can play. Let's say that.
I was raised by Black women. I got a grandmother, I got Black sisters, but I wouldn't dare put no Black woman in the White House. The commander-in-chief of the military, a Black woman.
Rolling your eyes there, Nitasha. Thoughts?
I mean, it really illustrates, what Moya Bailey was just discussing, whereas the previous clip was really gone with the wind vibes. This is something else, right? And it's not on me to speak about, intramural discussions that are happening here, but that was really disturbing, and it's definitely gendered racism that you're hearing there.
Moya?
Yeah, I am honestly just so sad that, again, people can make this claim of having Black women so close to them, family members, etc. But the idea of Black women being in charge, Black women being in a position of power, that somehow is anathema, and that's something that we can't imagine. Mm-hmm. That's a real problem.
Not only has Harris been on the receiving end of plain old racism, but also the questioning, belittling, as we mentioned before, of her multiple racial identities. The thing is, Nitasha, multiple racial identities, being multiracial, being biracial, it's not a new concept, as Natalie sort of mentioned earlier. So what is really going on here? Like, what is so hard for people to navigate in this discussion? Why does her being Black and South Asian make people so uncomfortable?
I mean, I think one of the founding obsessions of this country is really kind of sex across the color line. Now, mostly that has been based on, on unions between white folks and non-white folks, particularly Black and white, particularly in the time of enslavement. But one of the first, laws that was written in the 1660s was regulating interracial unions, was banning them. And it wasn't until 1967 with the Lovings that, states were no longer able to hold those laws federally, actually. So I think this is a national obsession. It really has to do, it was really informed by plantation economies, but it's maintained, until this time. And it's not just white folks who are trying to protect notions of white purity, which actually is really about white power and about access to resources. But various communities of color also have a hard time with multiracial folks. And I think what's different here in this case, and this is the part that I'm most excited about advancing our understanding, or at least the discourse, is that Kamala Harris represents one of the fastest growing populations in the U.S., and that is the multiracial population. And what's different here is that she's not part white. So I think a lot of people in many communities across the board can't quite grasp both this historical and meaningful, one drop rule, where if you have quote unquote one drop of Black or African blood, you are deemed Black. At the same time, her other quote unquote half is not white, right? So the default might not just be Black only. And so what does it mean to have a dual minority, multiracial woman? And what does that, or does that signify anything about her policies at all? So I think it's that multiraciality. It's the point that she doesn't have a white parent, and how do we understand Black and South Asian relations through the figure of Kamala Harris?
We've been speaking with Nitasha Sharma and Moya Bailey, both from Northwestern University, and Natalie Hopkins of American University. Now, they're going to stick around as we continue this conversation by talking about challenges towards Harris's policy and electability. That's just ahead on Reset.